When we think about diversity, we usually, we ask ourselves, why are there not more students that are Latino or African American in agriculture or Asian Pacific American? One of the most important agriculturalists that has ever lived is still alive today. Her name is Eva Villegas, and she helped develop quality protein maize, which increased the digestible protein in corn. That literally improved the nutrition of tens of millions of kids around the world because they got the essential amino acids that they needed for their brains to develop, for their muscles to grow. So here you have a Latina woman in the 1970s who develops this improved corn variety. And then hundreds of millions of households all over the world, in Latin America and in Africa, everywhere, are feeding their kids these better, more nutritious corn varieties that are giving them that protein so they grow taller, their brains fully develop, they live a better life. Almost no one has ever heard of her. Probably the most important Latina who has ever lived, the most important Latino ever in agriculture. So again, part of it's just we don't tell those stories. We don't celebrate those people. We don't value what's happening. So all around us at Iowa State University right now, there are thousands of incredible scientists and researchers and agriculturalists solving these problems. That's happening in every one of our states. And so part of it's just we have the largest research complex that has ever existed in human history, researching and studying and creating new technologies to improve the world and to solve all these problems. And it's happening in our own backyard. But we don't recognize it, we don't talk about it, we don't celebrate it. So I think part of it's not looking for the next Norman Borlaug, it's helping show every person that they have the capacity to be Norman Borlaug and to change the world. And here's how you do it. Here's where you can go to school so you learn what you need. Here's how you figure out to identify a problem that you can solve that'll make a difference in the world. Now go and do it. So I think that's maybe the bigger, deeper question we should ask, isn't just how we find it, but how do we create an environment that nurtures and supports and creates millions of Norman Borlaugs. There is so much talent in the world. And there are, especially with this generation, with millennials and with young people today, a deep passion to make a difference and to be connected and to understand the world that they live in and to be a part of it and to make a difference. And usually when we talk about millennials or young people, we do it in fairly derogatory ways, rather than in aspirational, value-driven ways. So part of that, I think, is just how do we change the conversation? How do we view it ourselves and view it differently? How do we then, rethink how we educate and market to people to help them understand how these issues relate? When we want to think about diversity, and we think about how do we make sure that we have truly a population that represents and reflects all of us, I think there's still a lot of barriers that exist. Some seen, some unseen. And we've started to make very real progress on gender within the agricultural community. But we still have a long ways to go. And where we're seeing a lot of that progress is in the very early stages of access to opportunities and in our educational system. So we're seeing much higher rates now of young women participating in secondary ed programs and in collegiate programs. So we're seeing, 60, 70% of FFA, programming now, young women. We're seeing leadership, that is emerging, that is, young women taking, leadership roles in these clubs and in these organizations and getting that experience to then vault themselves into a meaningful career in a life. But there's still a huge disconnect between kind of those mid-career professionals and senior leadership when we look at agribusinesses in this country and the leadership. It is still predominantly white males. There are very few women. There are very few racial or ethnic minorities. So again, when we start thinking about that, and we ask ourselves meaningfully, where is the talent coming from, and what is the talent that we need in the future? We are reaching such a small segment of our potential because we're not yet opening the doors. We're not yet speaking in a way that feels inclusive and comfortable. And a big part of that is when students come into these programs or come into companies to look at a job, do they see people that look like them? Do they see and do they know people that have worked here, that have been a part of this organization? Because if they don't, they will find a great job somewhere else. They will find another club to be a part of. So it's not just that we removed barriers, but we have to actively work to create an environment that actually feels comfortable and conducive for a person to be part of it. And that's just all of us. We want to belong. We want to see people like us. We want to be a part of something that we're comfortable with. So I think there are also some questions like that we should be asking. You know, we still have a long ways to go, but thankfully on gender diversity, we're actually finally seeing inclusion, and we're starting to see some real progress. We still have a very, very long ways to go, and it is still very sad how little racial and ethnic diversity there is in most of the agricultural community, within industry, within different organizations. But when we're thinking about geographic differences, you know, our students and young people from urban areas being brought into this field and in these areas, because they have a perspective and experience that's very relevant. You know, other communities and groups, are we engaging veterans? And are we working with communities that are now transitioning in their careers and utilizing their talents and skills that have been in a different sector? Because they have a lot to contribute. Is it an environment that is comfortable for a person that's lesbian or gay or trans to be able to contribute their passions to help solve these problems and make agriculture better and make the world better? Because that should be what we're all striving towards, to utilize every person's passions and talents and energy to move us all forward to solve these problems, to make a difference.